The city of Varrock smelled like smoke and iron. It always did. The governor's refineries ran day and night, burning dragonstone or pulled from the mountains by workers who never saw a fair wage. The smoke sat over the city like a gray blanket that never lifted. Most people stopped noticing it after a while. David never did. He was a cook. Not a celebrated one. He ran a small kitchen at the edge of the lower district, a cramped place with cracked walls, a second-hand stove, and a sign above the door that said Davins in faded black letters. He served dock workers, street cleaners, and anyone else who could scrape together enough coin for a bowl of something hot. His food was simple. His prices were low. He slept on a cot in the back room and woke before sunrise every single day. He was not a remarkable man by any measure the governor used to judge people. He had no title. He owned no land. He had never held a weapon in his life. But Davin had one quality that set him apart from almost everyone else in Varrock. He paid attention. It started 3 months ago, on a cold night when the wind came hard off the mountains. Davin had just closed up and was carrying a bucket of kitchen scraps to the back alley when he heard a sound. Small. Wet. Almost like a cough. He stopped and listened. He heard it again. He found them behind the old crates near the drainage gutter. 3 dragon hatchlings, each no bigger than a large cat, pressed together for warmth. Their scales were dull and dry, which meant they were dehydrated. Their ribs showed through the skin. One of them had a cracked wing membrane, dried blood along the edge. They were starving. They were alone. And they were looking at him with wide amber eyes that held no aggression. Only exhaustion. Davin stood there for a long moment. Dragon hatchlings in the lower district were not common. Adult dragons lived in the mountain territories far beyond the city wall, under arrangements the governor had made with the elder clans. Hatchlings this young should have been with a clutch, protected by a mother. These 3 had none of that. Whatever had happened to bring them here, it had not been kind. He went back inside. He heated the leftover bone broth from dinner service, added what scraps he had, and brought 2 bowls out to the alley. He set them down slowly and stepped back. The hatchlings hesitated. Then the hunger one. They ate fast, heads low, making small clicking sounds with their teeth. He went back inside and did not think too hard about what he had just done. But the next night they came back. This time there were 4. Within 2 weeks there were 9. They arrived after dark, quiet and careful, slipping through the gap in the fence behind his kitchen. Davin began setting aside food specifically for them. He learned which ones were bolder, which ones were shy. He learned that the one with the cracked wing, who he privately called Ash, always waited until the others had eaten before approaching. He learned that if he moved too fast they scattered. If he moved slowly and kept his eyes low, they stayed. He told no one. The governor's laws on unauthorized dragon contact were not clearly written, but they did not need to be. Everyone in Varrock understood that anything involving dragons belonged to the governor. Contact outside official channels meant questioning. Questioning meant the kind of trouble that people did not come back from the same way they went in. So Davin kept quiet. He fed them. He watched them grow a little stronger each week. He patched Ash's wing with a cloth binding one night when the hatchling let him close enough to try. He felt something during those nights that he had not felt in years. Purpose. Like what he was doing actually mattered. He did not know who had placed them there. He did not know why 9 hatchlings had ended up starving in the lower district alleys instead of safe in the mountains. He told himself it did not matter. They were hungry. He had food. That was enough reason. He was wrong to think it was that simple. On the 22nd night, Davin came out with the bowls as usual. The hatchlings were already there, waiting in their usual spots. But tonight one of them was different. It sat slightly apart from the others. Around its neck, nearly hidden beneath a ridge of small scales, was a thin silver band. Davin crouched slowly and looked closer. The band was engraved. He recognized the symbol immediately. Every person in Varrock did. It was the governor's seal. Davin did not move for a long time. He stayed crouched in the alley, eyes fixed on the silver band around the hatchling's neck, while the others ate quietly around him. The governor's seal. Small, precise, unmistakable. 3 interlocked rings with a dragon wing pressed flat beneath them. It was stamped on tax notices, on property seizure orders, on the armbands worn by enforcement officers who came to the lower district when someone caused problems. It was not something that ended up on a starving hatchling by accident. Davin set the bowls down carefully and stood. He did not run. Running would draw attention from anyone watching the alley entrance. Instead he walked back inside, closed the door behind him, and sat at his prep table in the dark for a long time without lighting a lamp. He thought it through slowly. The hatchlings had been coming for weeks. They were thin when they arrived, scared, clearly abandoned. He had assumed they were strays. Lost. Forgotten. But if even one of them carried the governor's mark, then nothing about their arrival had been accidental. Someone had placed them here. Someone had wanted them hungry enough to stay, frightened enough to keep coming back, and close enough to a specific person to watch what that person did. To watch what he did. The question that kept circling in his mind was not whether he was being observed. That much now seemed certain. The question was why. Davin was no one. He ran a small kitchen. He paid his district levy on time. He had no political ties, no rebel connections, no history of causing trouble. He was the least interesting man in Varrock by any reasonable measure. But someone had decided he was worth watching. And they had used hungry children to do it. That last thought settled in his chest like a coal. Not fear. Anger. He went back outside before the hatchlings finished eating. He moved slowly the way they preferred. He approached the one with the silver band carefully, keeping his breathing steady. The hatchling watched him with those amber eyes, tail low, body still. Davin crouched and held out a piece of dried meat from his coat pocket. The hatchling sniffed it. Then it stepped forward and took it from his hand. Up close the band was cleaner than the hatchling's scales. Recently fitted. The engraving was sharp. Davin looked at the inside edge of the band where it curved against the neck, and saw something he had missed from a distance. A second marking. Smaller. A number. 47. He memorized it and stepped back. Over the next 4 nights Davin checked the others. He was patient. He did not rush. He used food and stillness the way he always had, letting each hatchling come to him on its own terms. By the 4th night he had gotten close enough to check all 9. 3 of them carried bands. All hidden beneath neck scales. All bearing different numbers. 47. 12. 81. 3 spies in a group of 9. The others were possibly genuine strays, used as cover to make the group look natural. Whoever designed this had thought it through. Davin began to understand the shape of what he was inside. It was a test. The governor's office tested people in the lower district sometimes, looking for rebel sympathizers, unauthorized dragon handlers, anyone operating outside sanctioned channels. Davin had failed the test the moment he brought out the first bowl of broth. Every night since then had been documented. His kindness had been the trap. His compassion was the evidence. He thought about stopping. Closing the gap in the fence. Pretending he had never seen them. But he looked at Ash, asleep near the drainage gutter with the patched wing folded carefully against its side, and he knew he could not do that. The 3 with bands were instruments. The other 6 were just hungry animals someone had used as props. They had not chosen any of this. Neither had he. But here he was. On the 5th night after his discovery, Davin made a decision. He would not run. He would not stop feeding them. But he would start paying very close attention to the 3 with bands. Because if they were designed to observe him, then every time he got close to one of them he was also observing it. And small creatures, even trained ones, followed patterns. Patterns could be learned. Patterns could be used. He brought the bowls out as usual that night and set them down in the same spots. Everything normal. Everything calm. He did not notice the figure standing at the far end of the alley until it was already too late to pretend he hadn't. The figure did not move. It stood at the far end of the alley, half hidden by shadow, watching. Davin straightened slowly, keeping his hands visible at his sides. The hatchlings scattered at the shift in atmosphere, slipping through gaps in the fence and under the crates the way they always did when something felt wrong. Within seconds the alley was empty except for Davin and whoever was standing 30 feet away from him. Then the figure stepped into the light. She was older than he expected. A woman, maybe 60, with short gray hair and a heavy coat that had seen better decades. She walked with a slight lean to the left, like an old injury that had healed badly. She carried nothing in her hands. She stopped 10 feet away and looked at him with sharp, steady eyes. "You found the bands?" she said. It was not a question. Davin said nothing. 3 nights ago, she continued. You checked all 9 of them. Took you 4 nights total. That is faster than the last 2 people they tested. Who are you? Davin said. Someone who has been watching you watch them. She glanced at the empty space where the hatchlings had been. My name is Sarah. I work for no one you would want to name in an open alley. What matters is that I know what those bands are, I know what the numbers mean, and I know you have about 6 days before the governor's collection team comes to retrieve the hatchlings and review everything they recorded. Davin felt the cold settle deeper into his coat. Recorded how? Sarah reached into her pocket and held up something small. A flat disc, dark gray, no wider than a thumbnail. The bands do not just mark them. They store sound, proximity, Duration of contact. Every time you fed them, every time you got close, every conversation you had near them. 6 weeks of data, compressed and waiting for retrieval. She put the disk away. The numbered ones are the recorders. The others are just strays they picked up to make the group look natural. Standard governor surveillance method. They use it on suspected rebel sympathizers in the lower district every few months. I am not a rebel sympathizer, Davin said. I know that. You are a cook who felt sorry for hungry animals. She looked at him steadily. That will not matter to the collection team. The truth of it landed without drama. Davin had known it since the night he found the first band, but hearing it spoken plainly made it real in a different way. 6 weeks of recorded kindness would be presented as 6 weeks of unauthorized dragon contact. The governor's legal office would write the rest of the story themselves. What do you want? He said. The bands can be wiped, Sarah said. Not removed. Removing them leaves a physical trace and the hatchlings would react badly to the process. But the stored data can be erased if you know the reset frequency. I know it. I need 40 seconds of contact with each banded hatchling to run the wipe. The problem is they do not trust me. They have never been fed by me. They will not let me close enough. Davin understood immediately. But they trust me. You have 6 days. I need 1 night. She held his gaze. You bring them in close the way you always do. I stand at the edge of their comfort range and use the frequency device. You do not have to touch the bands or do anything you have not already done. You just have to feed them 1 more time. It sounded simple. It was not simple. If Sarah was wrong about the wipe, or if she was herself working for the governor, Davin would be handing over the only advantage he currently held, which was that the collection team did not know he had discovered the bands. Ignorance was thin protection, but it was something. He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about Ash sleeping by the gutter with a patched wing. He thought about 6 weeks of bowls carried out in the dark, and what those 6 weeks were apparently worth to the people who ran this city. Tomorrow night, he said. Same time. You stay at the fence line until I have them settled. Sarah nodded once and turned to leave. How did you know I found the bands? Davin called after her. She paused without turning around. Because the one you call Ash started sleeping closer to the door after you checked it. It trusts you more now, not less. She glanced back over her shoulder. That told me everything I needed to know about you. She walked away into the dark. Davin stood alone in the alley and looked at the empty bowls on the ground and tried to decide if he had just made the best decision of his life or the last one. Inside his kitchen, beneath the prep table where he sometimes rested his hand when he was thinking, something moved. Small. Quiet. A tiny scrape of claws on stone. Ash had not left with the others. Ash had stayed. Davin did not sleep that night. He sat on his cot with Ash curled near his feet, the hatchlings breathing slow and steady, its patched wing rising and falling in the dark. Davin watched the ceiling and ran through every possible way the next night could go wrong. He counted 11 before he stopped counting. Sarah could be a trap. The wipe device could be false. The hatchlings might not settle with a stranger at the fence line. The collection team could arrive early. Someone in the alley could see them and report it. The wipe could fail partway through and leave partial data that looked worse than full data. Ash might react badly when Sarah got close. 11 ways to lose everything. 1 narrow path through the middle. He got up before sunrise, the same as always, and started the stove. He cooked through the morning service in silence. His regulars came and went. Dock workers, street cleaners, a pair of old men who played cards at the corner table every Tuesday. Nobody noticed anything different about him. He kept his face calm and his hands busy, and he thought carefully about what he could control and what he could not. He could control the feeding arrangement. He knew exactly where each hatchling preferred to eat, which ones approached first, which ones hung back. He knew that the 3 banded ones, 47, 12, and 81, always settled on the left side of the alley near the broken crate stack. He knew that if he placed the bowls slightly closer together than usual, they would cluster. That would give Sarah shorter distances to cover with the device. He spent his afternoon break sketching the alley layout on a scrap of brown paper. He marked where each hatchling usually stood. He marked the fence line where Sarah would position herself. He calculated angles. He thought about timing. 40 seconds per hatchling meant 2 minutes total for the 3 banded ones, assuming no interruptions and no spooked animals. It was not a plan built from weapons or strength or any of the things people in stories used to fight back against power. It was a plan built from weeks of patient observation, from knowing exactly how 9 small creatures moved and ate and trusted. It was the only kind of plan Davin knew how to make. He folded the paper and put it in his coat pocket. That evening, 1 hour before the hatchlings usually arrived, Davin went to the alley and adjusted the bowl positions carefully. He moved the left side cluster tighter. He cleared a clear line of sight from the fence gap to the broken crate stack. He removed a loose plank from the fence that had always rattled in the wind, because rattling at the wrong moment would scatter everything. Sarah arrived exactly on time. She came through the fence gap without a word, looked at the adjusted bowl positions and gave a single small nod. She carried a slim metal tube no longer than her hand. She positioned herself at the fence line and went still. Davin brought the food out. The hatchlings came the way they always did, cautious at first, then faster when they smelled the broth. They found their usual spots. The banded three moved to the left cluster exactly as Davin had expected. He kept his movements slow and his breathing even. He crouched near Ash and let the familiar routine settle over the group like a blanket. He did not look at Sarah. He focused entirely on the hatchlings. He heard the faint hum of the device. Barely audible, lower than a whisper. 47 lifted its head once, ears tilting, then went back to eating. 12 did not react at all. 81 shifted slightly but stayed in place. Davin counted under his breath. 40 seconds felt like a very long time when everything depended on nothing going wrong. Then he heard something that stopped his count cold. Boots. More than one pair. Coming from the street end of the alley, not the fence end. Heavy and deliberate, the kind of walk that was not trying to be quiet because it did not need to be. Davin looked up. 3 men in gray enforcement coats stood at the alley entrance. One of them held a lantern. Another held a document. The third was looking directly at Davin with the flat expression of someone doing a job they had done many times before. Davin of the lower district, the one with the document, said, "You are 4 days early for our visit. Fortunately, we are flexible." Behind Davin, the hum of Sarah's device had stopped. He did not know if she had finished. He did not know if it had worked. He only knew that 3 enforcement officers were walking toward him and the hatchlings were starting to scatter, and everything now depended on what he did in the next 10 seconds. He stood up slowly, stepped forward, and smiled at them like a man with absolutely nothing to hide. Davin smiled and kept walking toward them. Not fast. Not slow. The same pace he used when he carried bowls to his regulars. Steady, unhurried, like a man who had been expecting company and was mildly annoyed they had shown up during cleanup. "You are early," he said pleasantly. "I would have set out better food." The officer with the document blinked. It was a small reaction, but Davin caught it. These men were used to doors slammed in their faces or voices that cracked under pressure. A calm cook offering hospitality was not the script they had rehearsed. "We are here regarding unauthorized dragon contact," the officer said, recovering. 6 weeks of documented interaction with unregistered hatchlings on this property. "Stray animals," Davin said. "I feed stray animals. I also feed dock workers and old men who cannot afford better. Is there a levy for compassion now? I have not seen that notice." The officer with the lantern raised it higher, sweeping the alley. The hatchlings were gone. Every single one, including Ash. The bowls sat empty on the ground. The alley looked like nothing more than the back end of a modest kitchen. "The hatchlings," the document officer said. "Where are they?" "Gone," Davin said. "They come when they are hungry and leave when they are full. I do not own them. I cannot produce them on request any more than you can produce the wind." The third officer, the one who had been silent, stepped forward. He was broader than the other two, with close-cut hair and eyes that moved carefully around the space. He was the one Davin was most concerned about. The quiet ones always were. "The bands," the quiet officer said. 3 of the animals were fitted with recorder bands. "We are here to retrieve the stored data." "I noticed bands on some of them," Davin said easily. "I assumed they had been tagged by District Animal Control. I did not touch them. Was I supposed to report that? I apologize if I misunderstood the procedure." The quiet officer studied him. "You are very calm for a man facing a contact violation." "I am a cook," Davin said. "I have burned my hands on a stove every day for 20 years. Enforcement officers asking questions about stray animals is not the most frightening thing I have faced this week." A long silence settled in the alley. The lantern flame moved in the wind. Somewhere down the street a cart wheel rattled over stone. Then the document officer looked at the quiet one and gave a short nod. The quiet one pulled a small receiver from his coat and held it toward the empty alley. He pressed the activation button. The device made a searching sound, cycling through frequencies. It found the band signals immediately. 3 of them still in range somewhere beyond the fence. Davin kept his face neutral. The quiet officer triggered the retrieval sequence. The receiver hummed. It pulled. It waited. The data return signal came back empty. The officer looked at his device. He triggered it again. Empty again. He checked the band frequencies manually, one by one. The bands were present. The bands were functioning. But the stored data was gone. 6 weeks of recordings, every bowl, every moment of contact, every night in the alley completely wiped. The quiet officer looked at Davin with an expression that was no longer flat. Davin looked back at him with an expression that had not changed at all. "It seems your equipment may have a fault," Davin said quietly. "I hope your technical team can sort it out." There was nothing they could do. No data meant no documented violation. No documented violation meant no legal basis for detention. They could search the kitchen. They could file a watch notice. They could make his life difficult in the small grinding ways that enforcement offices were skilled at. But they could not take him. The document officer folded his papers. The quiet one put the receiver away without another word. They left the way they had come, boots loud on the stone, lanterns swinging. Davin stood in the alley until the sound faded. Then he let out a slow breath and looked at the fence line. Sarah was gone. She had slipped out during the confrontation, exactly as he had hoped she would. He picked up the empty bowls and carried them inside. He set them in the wash basin and stood at his prep table in the quiet dark of his kitchen and felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for 6 weeks. Then he heard the small scrape of claws on stone behind him. He turned around. Ash was sitting beneath the prep table, amber eyes bright, patched wing folded neatly, watching him with an expression that Davin had no name for but understood completely. He crouched down and held out the last piece of dried meat from his coat pocket. Ash took it gently from his fingers. Outside, the governor's refineries kept burning. The smoke still hung over Varek like a gray blanket that never lifted. Nothing about the city had changed. The levies would still come. The enforcement officers would still walk their routes. The lower district would still wake before sunrise and work until it had nothing left to give. But in a small kitchen at the edge of that district, a man who held no title and owned no land and had never once held a weapon had looked the governor's machinery in the face and given it nothing. Not through violence. Not through rebellion. Through patience, observation, and the simple stubborn decision to keep feeding the hungry even when it cost him everything to do it. The governor had sent spies to find an enemy. What he found instead was a cook who was very good at his job. And somewhere beyond the fence, in the alleys and shadows of Varek, 8 hatchlings that had been used as tools were now simply free. And one of them, the one with the patched wing and the amber eyes, had already decided where it wanted to stay. Davin scratched gently behind Ash's ear ridge and stood up. Tomorrow he would open the kitchen before sunrise, the same as always. He would cook simple food at low prices for people who needed it. He would pay attention to things others ignored. He would keep doing the small, unglamorous, necessary work of making sure that something in this city ran on kindness rather than fear. It was not a grand victory. It would not be written down anywhere. But it was real. And it was his. And no one could take it back.